Thomas, you're the music supervisor on Better Call Saul, which is now in its third season. It's hitting that groove now that all long-running shows do, where everything's really starting to gel. So, since you've been there for since the beginning, can you talk a bit about how the show has developed in these three seasons?
Sure. Well, it was a very unusual start in the sense that we were beginning with a pre-existing team. The Breaking Bad team essentially reformed with some changes in cast and some changes in production and a few minor changes in post, but it's largely, at least from my operation, the same team. Dave Porter, the composer, is on board. Jason Newman, the music editor, is on board. We had many of the same writers. We had Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould as sort of our leaders. And Diane Mercer as our post-production producer. So we had a lot of the same people coming back. What was exciting about this was that from the very first meeting we had with Peter and Vince, it became very clear to us that they did not want to do Breaking Bad 2.0. They wanted to do something very, very different, and that we would be telling a different story and we'd be telling it in a different way. And additionally, sorry, the phones are ringing. I'm going to ignore it. Additionally, we had a situation where we were moving with a moving train, in essence. The show was basically greenlit to go to series, so we didn't have a pilot. Ordinarily in television, you have a pilot episode, and that pilot episode allows you to essentially figure out what you're going to do, what the tone of the show is, what everyone's role is. Here, we didn't really have that. We went in and production was already running, so by the time we were even getting a handle on what the first episode was going to be, we were already in production on additional episodes. So it was a rather unusual situation where we were really trying to figure it out, almost like a jazz band who had been playing rock music were suddenly thrown into a cruise ship with like the show running already. So it was our job to just figure out what we were doing and collaborate really well together to establish what the tone of the show would be, who Jimmy McGill is, and the world around him.
Mm-hmm. Now, you were the music supervisor on Breaking Bad, in case people couldn't tell from your office. What were some of the major differences between those two in terms of your work?
Well, they're very different shows. Jimmy McGill is a very different character than Walter White, and the world that we were in, both of the worlds are very different. Also, we had to sort of prepare for telling the story of Walter White very much from in the moment. We didn't know where he was going. We didn't know what was going to happen to him. We didn't have a destination that we were moving towards. With Better Call Saul, we knew that we would be ending up with Jimmy McGill becoming Saul Goodman at some point. And we knew that the worlds of Breaking Bad would at some point interrelate with the worlds of Better Call Saul. We just didn't know how it was going to happen. And because we were designing it very much as its own beast with its own sensibility and its own rhythm, its own way of telling music, telling a story with music, we ended up really kind of reinventing the wheel in a way. It was almost like learning how to play left-handed. And I think that was exciting for all of us. And I think that because the shows had different energies, Better Call Saul is a slow burn show. It's a show that has different stakes. It's not life and death in the same way that Breaking Bad is. It has a destination that it already knows. It's slowly and slyly introducing characters you may already know, but catching them at an earlier part of their development. So they're not the fully formed versions we know in Breaking Bad time period. So there's a lot of strategy. There's an enormous amount of sensitivity to the characters in their moment. And there was a lot of work to sort of connect, for instance, Jimmy McGill and his sort of aspirations and his connection with Chuck and his relationship with his brother was extraordinarily important. His relationship with Kim was extraordinarily important. And in many ways, I think that even though we were playing with the comedic relationship between Walt and Jesse, it wasn't really that we were calibrating their emotional relationship with each other. There was a natural sort of caustic energy between the two. It wasn't the job of music to help to establish that or to build their characters, whereas in Better Call Saul, it very much is.
So going off of that, I can't think of any other way to say this other than how you go about selecting songs to express those emotions that you're talking about.
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
How you go about selecting songs to express those emotions.
I mean, that's a very big question. I'm not sure exactly how to answer it. I mean, ultimately, you know, it's our job to tell stories, and it's our job to read the scripts very carefully, to put a lot of thought into the characters. We build playlists for all of our characters to get to know them. Many of it never ends up in the show. Much of it never gets sent to the producers. But it's a way of us informing ourselves about who the characters are, not just their music taste, but also music that speaks to their character or speaks to their wishes and their desires. You know, great storytelling is always about what is a character trying to achieve, and what is, you know, what gets in the way of that. And I think in the case particularly of Better Call Saul, who's an ambitious person who gets in his own way a lot, it's important to really get a sense of who he is. And part of that process is figuring out what types of music are able to help accentuate that story, or to help enliven that journey for the audience, so they really feel a sense that they know the character. Also, I think with both shows, the music is very, very broad in its scale. It's in almost every imaginable genre. There wasn't really any, we didn't say this is a rock show, or this is a rock en español show, or this is a regional Latin show. It was perpetually shifting what was appropriate to tell that story. And I think because of the bravery of Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould, we were really allowed to work with a very broad palette. The key thing was, is it informing the character? Is it telling the story in a dynamic way? And is this music finding a way to capture a spirit that's really unique to the show and to the characters in this moment, and propel our story forward?
Can you talk a bit more about the ways that, since you've worked with Vince Gilligan for so long, what that collaboration is like between you two, and on this show with Peter Gould?
Yeah, I mean, you know, when I was a kid, like the movie that probably influenced me the most was 2001: A Space Odyssey, the Stanley Kubrick film. And when I was 10 years old, I saw it. It was a 10th year anniversary of the film's release with my dad, and it really struck me. And I think it's one of those movies that if you look back, I know that I had a huge, I went through Kubrick films with such care and such reverence. And I never got a chance to work with Stanley Kubrick. It would have been my dream project to work with him. I feel like Vince is as close as I've gotten, and maybe the closest I'll ever get to a Stanley Kubrick. Stanley is one of those directors who knew a little bit about everybody's job. He had such a fierce intelligence and a curiosity, and such an empathetic sensibility, that he was able to, in many ways, do everyone's job for them, which means he held everyone really nicely accountable for their jobs. And let me just close this door really quickly, pardon me.
Oh, go ahead.
So I think that, you know, with Vince, you know, I met somebody who, you know, has the same kind of meticulousness. You know, there's no detail that gets overlooked with him. There's no element of story or character that he doesn't want to further express. He uses every frame, and I think all of us, Peter Gould included, all of us learned under Vince of how to do the best work possible. And Peter really has, I mean, it sounds so unfair to say he's blossomed, but watching Peter, you know, develop as a writer and as a director and as a showrunner is extraordinary. And I think that the work he's done with Vince on Better Call Saul is really breathtaking and really exciting. And I think that one of the great things about these jobs is that, you know, those of us who have the rare opportunity to work with somebody who's so gifted and so generous with their energy and is willing to pay attention and learn, they really develop their craft. And I think that one of the great gifts of working with Vince and with Peter is that everybody has developed their craft to an extraordinarily high level. I mean, everything from the cinematography, the costume design, you know, the production design, the sound effects, the dialogue editing. Everybody does such extraordinary work. I think all of us who work on the show agree that it's the best team of collaborators we've ever worked with. There's not a weak link anywhere in the bunch, and that's a real rarity. And I think that it informs the other projects that we work on as well.
I know that the season is still ongoing, so there's a lot that you can't talk about, and I can't talk about either. But I'm curious, of the episodes that we've seen so far, if there was a particular moment that you thought really stood out in terms of matching music to imagery.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of wonderful moments. I think a lot of Dave Porter's score this season has been really extraordinary. So not to sort of pass the compliment on to Dave, but it's exciting to me to see what Dave did in Breaking Bad, how different it is on Better Call Saul, and how resonant it is. And I think that in many ways, you know, Better Call Saul has a higher difficulty level. It's a slower show. It's a more methodical show. It really asks the audience to be patient and pay attention to every detail. Whereas Breaking Bad had such a breakneck pace to it that, in a way, it would allow, you know, it was an easier, I think, it was an easier thing for audiences to just dive into and run with. With Better Call Saul, everything that we could do wrong will show. It'll be noticeable. So the bar for excellence is even higher. So the fact that Dave has done such extraordinary work this season, in particular, I find it really, really inspiring. As far as the songs go, I mean, we've had so many wonderful moments. One of my favorite ones is when Jimmy is being arrested, and Chuck has essentially, you know, foiled him, set him up, betrayed him in the worst way imaginable, and the two brothers have one of the most sad and disheartening conversations you could ever imagine two siblings having just outside the house. And the police show up, and we follow as Jimmy gets put into booking and is basically sent to jail. And in many ways, this is a turning point. It's in many ways the heartbreak that leads us to Saul Goodman, because in essence, the story we're telling is Jimmy McGill becoming Saul Goodman. And I think that is one of those key moments. The fact that his brother has betrayed him so, and set him up, and has been so meticulous in his setting up of him, I think is a type of heartbreak that is almost unimaginable. And we have this wonderful Little Richard cover of the song Hurry Sundown that plays. And he kind of, you know, Little Richard has got one of those voices that you just, it's so extraordinary. It's from another planet, and it has this gospel power to it. The song itself is written by Hugo Montenegro and was used in a film. It was sort of a film, Hurry Sundown. And this cover of it had a weird primal energy to it and a sense of finality. And then it drops into a gentleness. It's almost like it has this bombastic and then it shifts into this sad resignation that carries us through the sequence. And I love the way it just kind of takes us into this major moment, but then allows us to almost absorb the fact that this is a turning point that is really more sad than it is anger driven, you know? Actually, in the same episode, we have a Todd Terje song. He's a fantastic Norwegian producer. And it's scoring a sequence that we have Kim. Basically, we're getting insight into how far along Kim is going with her ambitious schedule. And Vincent Peter had described it as, we want to have a Superman theme for Kim that shows her on the very teetering level of control. The idea being that she's almost out of control, but she's right on the very edge of it. And so the song that we found, I'm going to probably mispronounce the name, but it's Duske Donder, I believe is the name. This wonderful, very eccentric track from Todd Terje kind of captures that superwoman power, but it has such a hyperactivity. You get a sense that she really is almost out of control. And you know, it helps to kind of capture her at this point in time, I think, you know, effectively.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Speaking of Dave Porter, I wonder if you could talk about how you guys work together, you know, to figure out the appropriate kind of music that's going to be in each scene, whether it's going to be score or source.
Well, we have a music spotting session for each episode, which in the case of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul is very unique. We don't use temp music, so we don't have temp score placed in, which I think is a wonderful approach. It doesn't work on all projects, but it really works effectively on ours. In essence, because we have different editors, we have two different editors, Skip and Kelly, and instead of having them and their sensibilities really building the score or the way music is used, they really focus on storytelling with just the visuals. And then the idea being that we go in together with Skip and Kelly and Vince and Peter and the whole post-production team and really discuss with great care of how we can use music. Should it be a score moment? Should it be a source moment? What's the energy we're looking for? What are we trying to bring across? And that session, they're very long, and we also do sound effects and dialogue as well, any changes in dialogue that need to be done. And it's a very collaborative team. And I think that what's really great about that experience for us is that we each weigh in on each other's elements to a degree. There's a lot of trust and collaboration. There's no egos in the room. And it's really all about the story. How can we best and most effectively tell the story? And it's also a place where you can have ideas that don't work. Sometimes I will have an impulsive idea and I'll articulate it, and Vince or Peter might say, I don't know, or Dave might have an idea and he'll throw it forward, and I'll have another approach that might also work, and we might both tackle a sequence and see what works out. Ultimately, we're all in the service of the story, and we're all in the service of the characters and of doing the most effective storytelling possible. And because the room is really all about that, it really avoids a lot of the sort of more ego-driven stuff that sometimes happens in those sessions. So I think that, it really is a place where we're just trying to tell the best story possible. We all have certain weapons in our arsenal, and we all figure out what we think will be most effective for it. And Vince and Peter are really the guides to getting to the right answers and letting us know what's the right way to approach it.
And you've worked on a wide variety of shows as well. I mean, just reading off some of your credits, Love, Nobodies, Sneaky Pete, Grace and Frankie, Walking Dead, Ray Donovan, 6 Feet Under, which you got a Grammy nomination for. Going from show to show and finding the appropriate music for each story. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. It's one of the great gifts from music supervisors is the fact that we get to adjust to different stories and different approaches. I've found it most, my work has been, I think, most successful in television. I probably watch more films than TV, although these days we live in such a golden era. It's just as satisfying to go through, a 10-episode arc of a really smart television series as it is to see 2 or 3 really wonderful indie films. It's, we live in a tragedy of riches these days. But I would say, as far as the process, each project's different. There are different personalities involved. There's different approaches. There's different structures. Different editors build things in different ways. Different showrunners and writers write things in different ways. So there is no individual way of doing it. And the job of the music supervisor is to adjust to each project and find the most effective way of servicing that story. Sometimes I'm really following the cues of a writer who has very specific ideas for the episode, and we'll pursue it, and we'll clear the songs, and we'll navigate it. Other situations, I'm going to be bringing all the music to the table, and essentially, and sometimes I'll be weighing in on the score, sometimes I won't be. Sometimes the composer works very independently of the supervisor. Each group is different, and it's really our job to be good dancing partners. So if it turns out that you have a very strong music-intensive project that needs a lot of guidance, then our job is really to do all of that, to bring the composer on board. And we put a lot of care in reviewing composer reels and meeting with composers and getting to know them, so we get a sense not just of what their work is like, but also what their personalities are like. How well will they mesh with this group? So when we meet with showrunners, a very important thing is to kind of get a gauge on them. How do they like to work? Do they want to be at the composer's studio and sit in the room with them and go through score cues? Or do they want to be, checking quick times from afar and sending some relatively cryptic notes back? And is the composer able to address those notes no matter how cryptic they are? Does the composer need a lot of hand-holding, or do they really want to kind of have a lot of freedom and get a chance to kind of deliver the work in a very fast-paced environment? There's a lot of factors that come into that. So each project has its own interesting challenges, and it's really our job to say, okay, for this project, we're going to be bringing this composer on board, and we're going to be working very closely with that person. And we might be, for instance, commissioning new work where we might be collaborating, or which we did on Turn quite a bit, where we worked with Marco Beltrami and brought in songwriters to write songs that he was orchestrating. In other shows like The Walking Dead, it was really our job to commission songs and to basically get a very full sense of the show and the characters, and then be able to reach out to largely new and upcoming artists who had something that really resonated with the tone of it, which is where we got Jamie Ann Commons into the show to write a beautiful song for it. That was a very unique project. 6 Feet Under was a collaboration with Gary Calamar, my old partner, and in many ways we worked in a very yin-yang kind of way. Some of the things he did and he brought to the table, very different things I brought to the table, and we found a way to kind of both cover the needs of that project as we traveled through. Each project is unique. Ray Donovan was very different, and I think that, and sometimes we have different showrunners. For The Walking Dead, we had 3 different showrunners while I was working on the show, and that is also a unique challenge, because you're now shifting and adjusting to a new vision coming in, a new way of working, and it's really our job to be nimble and to be very thoughtful in how we deliver our ideas and make sure that we're servicing not just the project, but the people who are, leading the project.
Well, Thomas, thank you so much, and congratulations on another season of Better Call Saul. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
You're welcome.